guys, welcome to the Security Space podcast. Today we have got Andy Simpson and Adrian Taylor from Supplier, and what we will be discussing is how to transform your supply chain into competitive advantage. But that will all make much more sense, obviously, once we delve into the topic. But before that, Andy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please, if that's okay?
Yeah, some people might say that's my favourite subject.
Yeah.
But I promise you it's not. No, so hi. Thanks for having us today, Nick. My name's Andy Simpson, co-founder, CEO of Supplier. Prior to that, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at House of Parliament Restoration Delivery Authority. Prior to that, I'd done a stint as Head of Security at Rolls-Royce Small Modular Nuclear Reactor Programme. Prior to that, I've got some private sector MSP experience, and I've done a full military career, a technical career, although I don't look old enough, right, Nick? That's what you're about to say.
Yeah, the light paper round is all I like.
Oh, the light paper round. Yeah.
To me, it sounded like that just fell out the back pocket at the end. Like, oh no, I've also had a career in the
But you know what, mate, right? That's all professional stuff, right? What you really want to know is I'm a star sign Aries, right? Golf and F1 are my sports. I love all types of food.
Football.
I like 80s and jazz music, and you might often find me in the hot tub listening to 90s piano rave to unwind.
So
there you go. Now you know about me.
Piano rave.
Yeah.
What is that?
It's a bit of dance music, but it's got a piano in it, and maybe that's why I like jazz, because it segues into jazz and saxophone stuff as well.
All links well.
There you go. So now you know professionally, and now you know a little bit privately about me.
Perfect, Andy. Perfect. And Adrian, how do you top that 90s piano rave?
90s piano rave. There's a long time since I did any of that, mate. So you're all right. Probably drinking is one of my favourite topics. But there you go. That's gone now. Now my liver's packed in. I can't do that anymore. Adrian Taylor. Yes, I've been around for a fair while, consulting. Started career in things like retail banking, stuff like that. Internet. As the internet grew, I've been like a technician way back, and come through as pre-sales, all sorts of stuff for various security products, and latterly for the last 20 odd years I've been doing cybersecurity consulting. So I don't know, investment banks, Department for Education, Ministry of Justice, all sorts of places, Independent Police Complaints Commission, London Organising Committee for Olympic Games, some of the highlights. So but I haven't got a hot tub. I think the biggest thing I've got is a sink that I can dip my foot into. That's about it.
I'm more or less the same. And how did you chaps meet in the end then?
So that's it. So that there is that's brilliant. So Adrian was on my security team at the Parliament programme, and he was the lead security consultant for Supplier digital assurance, so business to business software that we were bringing into the organisation, and also some broader existing risk with existing suppliers who are managing existing physical information. So we met January 2023.
Okay.
And Adrian stayed with me for just under 2 years before he offboarded, and that was the usual reasons, site recycling of people and money.
Yep.
So that's where we met.
Essentially, it was grown up out of consultants and contractors, because it was a spin-off from department in the House of Parliament, to just substantiate and create restoration and renewal projects that was not directly controlled by government. So it's a wholly owned whole subsidiary of two organisations sponsored by the Delivery Authority, and we were in the Delivery Authority, helping to plan and then implement changes to the House of Parliament to make it stop bricks falling on people's heads and stuff like that. So,
but our focus was all about securing that information.
It was,
because it was the first time, one of the first sort of major programs where that information was going to be hosted into a private cloud environment.
Okay.
And then augmented by a lot of subsidiary software systems to come together to make what would be known as a type of common data environment for future design stuff.
Yes.
So we were very much wrapped into understanding existing UK and regulatory compliance frameworks for housing that type of information,
Mm-hmm.
because it isn't routine information. It attracts a certain classification, which then attracts a certain type of control,
Mm-hmm.
which then attracts a certain type of risk appetite, which then attracts a certain type of approach, etc., etc. And when you're a supply chain driven organisation that we are,
Yeah.
were, we've now obviously departed. It's fundamental that your approach and all those little things that I just touched on there are recognised all the way to the supplier who's supporting that objective. So, yeah, that's how we come together.
Yeah.
And clearly we got along, respect each other, because we've come together to do this. And there's a third person who's not here today, who should be here. We have to say and introduce him. Is a chap called Matt Wilson. Matt Wilson is, I say this quite freely, he's the secret sauce to sort of our relationship as people who are building Supply Sure and leading. And what some people say, we're going to be a positive disruptor, which is great when we hear that, because they buy into our vision and they understand the direction of travel we want to take supply chain security assurance. So Matt is heavily commercial. He was the head of commercial at Houses of Parliament programme. And we came together with Matt because we made such advances in getting right downstream, upstream, downstream, both ends of the stream with our suppliers. Yeah. And the rebuilding that relationship with commercial, and then the commercial team walking us into the suppliers all the way to the point where we are very much a part of that supplier's DNA security is all complementary, because the relationship that the security team I built, Adrian built,
Yep.
and others built with the commercial guys and the procurement guys ultimately, who were bringing in the suppliers.
Yep.
So we really demonstrated that shifting security, and you hear about DevOps life cycles, shifting security to the left, well, this is literally pushing all the way to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Security requirements, but doing it a different way. And Matt enabled that. And we didn't realize at the time that's such a novel position we were in, having built that relationship with procurement, the governance team, the commercial team, security team, how actually advanced in the way of thinking that currently is, right? Because most organizations are so fractured and so fragmented across those individual pillars, they never really exist to build that relationship. But it was such a small program, it's a very large program, but a small knit bunch of central players.
Yes.
We were able to do that successfully.
It was built out of necessity as well, because we as a group were a client of the Houses of Parliament. So if you imagine that, this is just one example. I mean, we've got loads of background examples from other groups, but essentially being a client, they wanted to have certain specific requirements for us that we had to meet. So we had to design, and those other teams like in the procurement area and data services areas, as well as the cybersecurity areas, we all had to work together to try and formulate a framework that would work across all suppliers and all digital suppliers. So how do you recognize what a digital supplier, when it might be risky,
Yes.
when you might have a critical supplier, those types of elements. If you look at it from the lens of procurement, then you might say, we'll just cut these into bands of financials. So anything below 10K, we're not bothered about. Anything above 10 to 100K, we want to do this. Anything above, 200K, 300K, something like that, want to do that. And that doesn't cut it in terms of risk, because you're not looking in the right areas. You've got to be looking at the information, the criticality to the business, etc. What are those groups doing? So that's the difference, I think.
It's really worth as well outlining the scale, though. So just to give you the idea of the scale, and this is the public knowledge, it's publicly available. The program itself was looking and is looking to acquire 3 prime partners to deliver this, and the numbers online are reported to be in excess of £10 billion of procurement, right? Okay. So those 3 sort of prime partners, a construction partner, an enabling partner to look over it all, and a design partner to do the design. So that's where the main procurement would happen. Now you can imagine with a figure like that, how much how much supply chain is going to be involved. So that's what we built. We built a really comprehensive relationship, but it came to an end too soon for us. So we left early. Matt left early. And then I was so interestingly, I've had this idea in my head about 12 months.
And a little tap on the shoulder.
He had a little tap on the shoulder. I've had this idea about 12 months. Starting when I was at Rolls-Royce, when I was looking at supply chain security, I always gravitated to that space.
Okay.
When you're looking at different areas of security, you've got a security operations team, so a SOC, you've got a risk management team, you've got an assurance team, supplier team, information security, a bit of governance. I always gravitated towards the supplier assurance because I found it a really interesting area, really complicated. And it seemed
Very
to be
overlooked area as well.
nobody's taken it on other than some tech vendors. Some tech vendors have done a great job in introducing third-party risk management tools.
Yep.
And they're generally young tech entrepreneurs, heavily backed by venture capitalists.
Yep.
And they've recognised the need in the market, and they've built some great quality tech.
Yeah, I did a podcast with Mirror Security, who I think are just a seed vendor over in Israel. But like I said, there's obviously more, but off the tip of my tongue, you could probably count them on one hand. The ones that purely focus on supply chain risk. So, sorry, just to segue back to what you were saying, there's obviously a gap in the market. So I'm guessing is that where we're coming to?
Well, the way we've gone, what we've seen happen is, so what I've seen happen is, there's a very traditional approach to the problem. Let's put some security requirements into commercials, or let's put some security requirements into procurement before the commercial takes place. Those security requirements are generally generic security requirements that may factor on stuff like, you must have a certain certification, right? And if you've got a certain certification, that's usually the obvious one. People ask for 27001 information security management system.
Cyber essentials.
You almost get a tick to say, okay, let's have a look at your certificate. Let's look at the clauses and the controls that you're implementing at. Is it 92 now or 93? Which one?
93.
Is it 93? Let's see what controls out of the 93 you're implementing. And if you've got a control for endpoints, vulnerability, or if you've got a control for threat detection, that then ticks the compliance. Say, oh, that organization's doing endpoint, doing vulnerability management, doing live monitoring. So you almost, as a supplier, you're ticking the box to say, yeah, you're compliant.
Yep.
But actually not understanding the real context behind it.
And that's what the software, what the software does. So the software, okay,
they look from the outside in.
Okay.
And then questionnaires that people get, they tend to look from the inside out, but there's a gap in the middle.
Yes.
And you might have heard that before, the kind of this kind of third party end-to-end life cycle gap, where you've got people that know the context on the inside, doing the questionnaires, responding to people that they're trying to buy from or sell to. That doesn't give you enough from the outside because they don't want to join the two up. You can see from the outside open source intelligence from various scoring type companies, third-party risk management companies. I work with a few of them at an investment bank, a Swiss investment bank, and very interesting products, and they have their place, definitely. But I think the main thing is that kind of missing bit all the way from left, as we say,
yes,
from procurement all the way through, and ownership, governance in the C-suite, all the way through to being able to see from the outside in and monitor and get triggers to say, hang on a minute, something's happening to that vendor over there.
Yes.
But actually, they shouldn't be, because it says here in our contract and in our questionnaire that they're particularly doing this thing. This control is in place. So that thinking never happens, because it's usually the cyber organization that's doing the monitoring,
yes,
and it's the procurement team that hasn't got as much experience about cyber that's doing the kind of questionnairing, and there's no kind of middle risk management that's going on. So these kind of end-to-end things are where we step in.
And you've got, so what Adrian describes there is that sort of silo function, right, approach, where everyone's doing what they believe is right, but not necessarily, and they're all believe they're pulling in the right direction, in the same direction. But there's these grey areas, and that's the bit where we are trying to address. So getting away from the self-testations, moving away from subjective analysis,
yes,
understanding what that looks like in terms of qualitative, evidence-based assessments. So an example would be certification may say an organization does great vulnerability management, has XYZ controls in. Fantastic. How do you deal with a CVE that comes in, a CVSS scoring of 8 or 9, which should be dealt with in 24 hours, let's say, or a 0 day? Oh, okay, yeah, we've got vulnerability management software in place. Great, tick. Actually, if you sit on the shoulder of possibly the SOC analyst or the SOC manager and say, okay, show us the last time a CVE XYZ with a scoring of 8 or 9 came in, show us from when that ticket was raised to when the engineer closed or patched patched the vulnerability. And actually, when you look at the detail, it might have been 7 or 8 days.
Yep.
So yes, they have a vulnerability management. They have a process in place that manages the tickets and the patching, but the internal priorities, because let's say an example might be their IT service stack, how they do service management might be so under so much pressure to do with all the other types of requirements that an IT team deal with. Some of the tickets that go in to the engineers don't actually get addressed in line with the recommendation timescales for a CV of a scoring of 8 or 9. So then you're going to go, okay, sorry, but you're failing that because you're not patching on time in accordance with the severity of the vulnerability that has been shared.
Yep.
So, but that wouldn't come through on self-attestation or on some software.
Yeah. It's
the
about
evidence.
Who's filling it in is the other question. So I've been on the other side where I've been drafted into a couple of companies. One that was a welfare to work company, so they were facing off to Department for Work and Pensions, and basically they had to pass this assessment, right? So hadn't a clue. They gave me the list, gave me a knock. I came in, sat down with them, and it's quite obvious they're a company that was from Holland, and they essentially they have a different approach to privacy over there, and they thought it would be the same over here. This was back in 2009, 10, somewhere around there. So it's kind of that era where GDPR is not quite in place, but privacy was a thing.
Yes.
Everyone dealt with it slightly differently. DWP had their questionnaire. It was sent down to them, and then I was assisting them go through the questionnaire and checking off what they were doing, and then improving their processes. So that was the kind of consultation. But it staggered me that there was nobody in that organisation actually knew how to answer that.
Yep.
And what they'd attempted to do was answer the questions as they thought it. So they got the context all wrong. And this was the start of my kind of journey into third-party risk management, was this type of questionnairing from the inside, but also then later on joining that up with some clever technology from, say, Risk Recon. They're now a MasterCard company, who came in and said, right, we can show you what your third and fourth parties are looking like. So,
yes.
Great, let's have a look. So we'll do it on ourselves first because we know the control set. We'll test it out. Fantastic. Blah, blah, blah. Hang on a minute. And we did it also with BitSite. How does it know, what's this here? We've got this kind of something calling out to the internet, and it doesn't look like one of our devices. What do we do? And they said, oh, it's got to be, it's in your range, it's in your IP range. It's got to be yours. So you've got to own it. Yeah. They didn't have that kind of, they couldn't place any context on anything they were finding. So roughly they knew parts of the network were assignable to us, but other parts they weren't sure. When we gave them that kind of feedback, say that's not ours, they wouldn't change the scoring. So you ended up with this kind of what you thought was a sense of false scoring. It's probably a lot more mature nowadays, but that's the kind of journey that you had. It was this kind of sense that nobody's able to give you the full end to end, and that's where we started thinking about how can we do this as an individual end to end framework and improve the processes as we go.
Look, don't get us wrong. There's a lot of organisations out there who are security organisations or just a standard consultancy organisation that take a security pillar. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to be niche and we're trying to be deep in our subject. Yep. That's what we are. We're not focusing on third party risk management, which is what traditionally a lot of the software vendors do, and a lot of the consultancy houses will do. We're looking at third party cyber risk management. Okay. So particularly security and information. And we're trying to be niche in respect of, we will look at that from an end to end life cycle. And if something falls out of that scope, we're not going to touch it because we want to specialize in our subject. We don't want to be the best at what we do. We want to be the only people that do it.
Nice fighting talk.
Well, it's true. It's true. It costs a lot of money to be the best because everyone wants to be the best, and it costs a lot of money to try to be the best. But if you could be the only, then you're creating yourself your own marketplace and your own reputation. And I think this is really about timing. So, and this was a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, but it underpins the mindset and the way we started off. So late last year, I think it's October, November last year. Everyone knows who Gartner is. They're a huge global think tank, push out a lot of great research analysis. They published a paper, and I think it was dated the 30th or 31st of October, based on supplier security assurance and third-party cyber risk management.
Mm-hmm.
And this paper talks about exactly, and by the way, it was published the same month I registered the business. So it just goes to show, right? Timing's everything. And it goes to show timing's everything. If we're seeing the problem, we've lived the problem, we've sat in the seat of another CISO, and Adrian sat in the seat of his opposite risk assessors. We've launched this business at the same time the market is being generated by these global think tanks. And they talk about supply chain security assurance now moving from this sort of stagnant operational approach to an end-to-end life cycle. So starts with procurement, ends in renewal, back to procurement. And that's exactly when I spoke to Adrian, probably last autumn, and I said to him, I've got an idea, because nobody's doing this.
It was November.
But it wasn't an idea to make money. It was an idea because this needs fixing.
Yep.
It was something
we've got the scars ourselves,
Yeah.
and all we can see is more tech coming out.
Mm.
And the tech
And the
market
tech does have its place.
Yeah. It absolutely has its place.
Yep.
But it doesn't fix the whole picture. And we don't fix the whole picture. It's all complementary. And
Yes.
you know, but we are shining a light on areas that have not been discussed.
Yep.
Between, I would say, these tech vendors and the customer, and we're offering some visibility into that.
Nice. So, what actually is the problem statement when it comes to supply chain security?
Let's break it down. I think let's go with there's three areas that we try to cover on this one. Business sponsors. So business sponsors might be
Who owns the
your
problem?
customer in the organization. So let's say you're a large mod organization, car manufacturer, and somebody internal needs, let's keep it really simple, a piece of software to help with their directorate pillar. They are the business sponsor, the customer. They have a requirement for, let's say, a business intelligence software. They put the requirements in. As the customer, it goes into procurement, and then the cycle starts. So where we are seeing the problem is that business customer is not necessarily managing the supplier information risk themselves. So an example would be, let's say marketing division within this large organization needs this business intelligence software. I want this business intelligence software. It needs to have X, Y, Z requirements. It goes into procurement. Procurement then go and buy it. Once it's purchased, it comes into the organization. You start then determining how you're going to share information with those organizations. And then you start determining, oh, we need some security controls around this now. But it's just been bought. Mm. Right, okay. So now who's managing the process in terms of understanding the risk of that information sat in that software? Well, security need to. But the problem we have now is security would never recommended you buy that piece of software, because the way they do their software development life cycle isn't in compliance with how we do our software development life cycle within the boundaries of how we operate in the UK or Europe or whatever industry it might be in.
Yep.
We've got a problem now.
Yeah, so the pre-contract stuff has to change.
And then, but the problem is the business, go back to the business sponsor. The business sponsor is sat somewhere else in the organization now.
Yeah.
You know, twiddling the thumbs, stamping the feet. When am I getting this in service? When am I getting this in service? There's a problem. The problem is it doesn't comply with our security risk appetite or meet our controls. I don't care. It's been signed off. It's been bought. I've promised the delivery of the outcomes to this. I want it in service. So what do you think happens then, Nick?
You tell me. You guys are the experts.
It gets put into service.
So you end up swallowing risk.
You end up
all the way along. And how do you manage that risk? Well, normally you would go back and try and negotiate some kind of risk treatment plan or something like that with the organisation. If there's nothing in contract, they're quite within their rights to say, sorry, can't do that. It's not in contract. We've not budgeted for it. It's not part of our service model. It's going to bust our profitability. So you'll have to wait until next contract renewal, which could be a few years' time. And that means that you're at risk for, or exposed to risk for that amount.
Where the the right approach would be the business sponsor engages with those people who are setting the requirements for the procurements.
Yep.
Security is brought into that with the requirements. So this piece of software must be able to do X, Y, Z. Okay. But it also must be able to meet security controls X, Y, Z.
Yep.
Okay. Then procurement go and buy it. Um,
And the way you do that is you'd set it around a kind of criticality assessment.
Okay.
What is critical about this service to our business? And if it's above a certain threshold, you'd start laying in to contract absolutely non-negotiables,
Yep.
which mean that you can't even buy it until those have been met. And that's probably where we start.
I suppose just to come in on that is a key question that's a little bit bigger than what we're talking about, and it is about how security fits into a lot of companies' business strategy. And you, so a lot of companies just don't see security as an investment because it doesn't provide a direct ROI. And is this a conversation that you guys bang your head against a wall about? Because, like you say, you guys have got to fight against this and say, like, yes, it's not a direct ROI, but look at what will happen if you do get breached, and this is what we're trying to avoid. Or is this not a conversation that you guys are having when it comes to measuring the criticality of?
always having that conversation because so let's just correct that statement. It does create return on investment, but it's up to security leadership to be able to articulate that to the people who don't think it does.
I agree.
Right.
I think the general
budget allocation wise,
Yep.
you might end up with budget being spent in one particular place rather than spread backwards into the responsibility chain. So if you made stakeholders partly responsible and they had some budget, they would be responsible for a certain aspect of it. And then cybersecurity, another aspect, et cetera, for monitoring, your budget would be spread more effectively and you get things done earlier. So you wouldn't have these problems. So where is the money being spent? It's being spent on reassessment, where you've said no to a supplier because it doesn't meet maybe one of your clients' expectations. You have to go and rebid.
Yep.
It means you have to go around that cycle again, and that means more money.
Yep.
That means your budget's just gone. So doing it right, doing it once, doing it right, first time, shifting all of that responsibility and thinking left means that you can deliver on time and be effective.
And on that traditional approach, where let's say the standard security set of requirements go in for every procurement process, regardless of what's being purchased, so it's almost agnostic to the subject.
Yep.
It's just a reoccurring wheel of trouble. Whereas what we do, we work with, let's say a routine organization, let's say has 8 or 9 or 10 directorates, executives running each directorate. I would be looking at a way of federating the risk of supply chain security across the directorates. And I'd be having conversations with each leadership pillar to say, do you know what information of your pillar, of your team, your whatever area you're looking after, do you know what information is in the supply chain? Chances are they go, no, ask security. Or ask the information guys. No, it's your information. You're the information asset owner because it's, let's say it's the COO. Let's say the COO has got an operations team.
Yep.
Do you know how much of your operational information is in spread across X, Y, Z? No, I don't. Right. Do you think you should? Okay. Well, some people will say yes. Some people will say no. It's somebody else's problem. If they say it's somebody else's problem, they're clearly, from my perspective, a type of antiquated background where traditional types of organizations, but it's not somebody else's problem because money is squeezed so tightly in organizations these days. Organizations are built so lean. Executives have to take on the responsibility of what they own. And if it's information, take ownership of it. But it works in your favor. Back to the COO example. The COO may have a higher risk appetite with his information or her information in the supply chain than the marketing director has.
Yep.
So actually then what we do is we work with the COO and say, okay, you've got a higher risk appetite, so let's maybe loosen some controls so you can go about and achieve your objectives because your objectives are linked to X, Y, Z priorities of the organization. Are you happy with that? It's your risk appetite. Security say just enable that and we'll work with procurement and the supplier. Yes, that's where we want to be. Okay, great. Marketing director or engineering director go, no. I'm more risk adverse because if this, for their own reasons, so that we may play more controls against their suppliers. But you can't do that if they're not bought into understanding and buying into being the business customer.
Yep.
Working with the requirements that are set with procurement from day one. But there's a big mindset change there. I mean, now we're talking, there's a huge culture shift here that needs to take place. So a lot of organizations that we work with, that conversation happens up front. We do things differently. Your organization needs to be willing to accept individual risk, accept the federated approach, and be ready to go onto this journey with us.
And is that what you guys do? Do you come in and firstly have to educate them on this, that this is happening within their own organisation and they're not seeing it, or are organisations seeing it and then you can sort of elaborate the next steps?
I think they're kind of aware of it. I
Yeah.
mean, there's certain level of maturity now.
Okay, good.
Certain, third party risk management and the requirement for risk management in supply chain has been around for years. I mean, I knew about it certainly 5 years ago. There were people and products doing this straight away. Way before that, 2009, I mentioned earlier. So you kind of go, they must know about it. It's just a case of how do we allocate our funds? How do we allocate our effort and resources? Whose responsibility is it? How do I detect risk in the supply chain as it's working, in operations? So have I got the capability in my contracts to go and look and do audits, or requirement to report incidents, to get patches done in a particular time, tell us when there's a change of access to our data, etc. Do I do all of that in my, as far left as I can? And the answer is usually no. And that's the revelation to most people, is doing it early.
There's a driver here now, though, to answer that question as well, the regulators. So there's a lot of regulatory pressure now in pushing organisations
so obvious, but
think that way. I mean, look at NIS2, Network Information Security 2 Directive. It's an EU legislative framework, and that has a lot of emphasis now on if you're in the EU. Testing myself here now. It might be Article 21.
Yeah.
Is it Article 21? If you are critical industry or entity,
get out more.
if you're a critical industry or entity, your compliance with that is pretty much compulsory. So critical being, it could be anything like energy, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, utilities, financial services, digital services, any type of service that is deemed critical to the running of a country or the operating of a country. Now that's so does that matter to people in UK? No, but it matters to medium to large organisation UK, because if you're medium to large, you're working with EU partners, or you're working in Europe, right? So they're pushing quite a lot of emphasis on that. So is DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act, which is more financial services. 28,001, which is Supply Chain Security Assurance Standard, and there's 27,001, which has got some more elements of cybersecurity and supply chain.
Cyber Resilience Act.
Cyber Resilience Act 2024, that was published last year with emphasis. So there's a load of stuff out there that is shaping people's mindset, and if you look at some of that stuff, and it's probably best just look at common themes rather than drawing it all out. One of the themes is leadership. I'm going to say accountability. I think it's accountability.
Yeah.
So that doesn't stop with the security leader, the CISO or head of security. That actually calls out board accountability for supply chain security. So there's an opportunity there to work with boards and executive teams to, just take them on that journey. I think it's sort of, it's a slow burn, but they need to pick that up. There's a lot of emphasis as well on evidence. Okay. Go back to the example I said earlier about CVEs and checking when tickets are closed. It could be a case of asking an organisation, how do you run your identity access? What type of identity platform do you run? How do you know the right people are in the organisation, the right people being offboarded? You might want to sit on the shoulder of the SOC analyst or the identity person and do a sample of identities and see actually are people being offboarded. So again, a piece of evidence that you could collect rather than just ticking, yes, we have an identity platform, we do role-based access controls, and we have an IAM policy. It kind of doesn't mean you're doing it.
Yeah,
there's a lot about
we
evidence.
request access control lists on a regular basis, certainly privileged access control lists as well. We'd improve things like personnel vetting for anyone that's got enduring access to data and services. Those kind of, anyone with access to infrastructure, those types of people would have an elevated level of vetting, and those are the kind of things you can do. You can tailor. You don't need to do everything for everyone. I think that's the I can hear people screaming into the when they're watching the podcast that it's not, you can't do all of this for everything.
Yes.
You've got to, and this is where the kind of criticality comes into play. You'll have a kind of set of sliding bars as to how much effort you put into validating certain controls and what you require at each control level. So you kind of tier it going downwards from, and a lot of people have been basing criticality on numbers, on the contract value, but actually the contract value of a pen test could be 2K, but actually that's all of your weakest points in your organization, and it's sat on some server somewhere in some mom and pop type style house, with no controls around it, but no one's looked.
Yep.
That goes missing. That's a very valuable piece of information. Yep. It's that kind of criticality to the business type of element that needs to be looking, as well as business impact and privacy impacts.
I think back to the themes as well. There's the I'm just trying to think of the themes. There's also visibility.
Okay.
So traditionally, let's look at our critical. So an organisation will look at their critical suppliers.
Yep.
They may, again, determine a critical supplier being the contract value, but the regulators now talking about all the way to your third, fourth, the nth degree supplier, making sure those requirements are filtered down and you have visibility of that.
Yep.
So writing your acceptance of being able to audit all the way to the lowest denominator, delivering the service that you're paying for. What other themes did we pull out?
Crikey, there was about 7 of them.
Yeah, so there's a lot. There's a lot out there. So there's a lot of good material to help shape some of that thinking.
I think it's just a conversation that I had on a podcast previously. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to give you a very deliberately naive question, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. When it comes to regulations and compliance, there's so many variables to think of. But the one I'm going to throw at you is, obviously, regulations differ from country to country, region to region. Would it not be easier if there was just one standardized set of policies? I appreciate there's so much to think about this. There's so many different variables, even just sector to sector. But if we had one standardized set of controls, would it reduce risk, or would it in fact increase risk because of said different variables?
There
are. So things like Cyber Essentials might do that. So NCSC have brought out, and with IASME, they've brought out a set of baseline controls for industry, and they should be followed. That should be a baseline, for any organization, even one size of, a small consultancy or a large consultancy or whatever. You should be doing those kind of things off bat. So there's
other organisations that are not.
I think that what Nick's calling out there, you're talking about geographical and jurisdictional compliance.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're speaking more macro level, right?
Yeah.
So countries, and you're, as we spoke about earlier, and there's an ISO standard, international standards 27,000 and 28,000, both look at information, so they do exist. That's the first thing. I think
Swiss banking law, classic.
Your query's blurring it with regional compliance, and that regional compliance will anchor to the local geographical and jurisdictional types of controls. But that will be compliant with the local governments, what they want. So imagine geographical and jurisdictional stuff if you're living and working in the Far East, compared to if you're living and working in a mainland European country like Holland. They're going to be completely different, because the government has a different approach to their leadership and what they expect from large corporates. So I think you split them that way. They are international standards that you can comply with, but there's regional compliance that are anchored to how a region or a country is governed.
But there are different tools as well. You can apply at different levels. So if you say your data had to be stored in an area where the government, in theory, could have access to your data, you might opt to keep your keys offshore. So data keys could be kept in-house, bring your own key or manage your own key type of aspect. So those types of elements could be played into that, but that would be spotted at the risk assessment essentially early on. So you knew that you'd have to negotiate that into any solution before you started it. That's the beauty of doing it early, is that you can design all these things into contract and track them. And if there's a risk, you know how the risk is going to pan out, whether or not it's going to be treated, accepted, transferred, whatever you want to do with it. So,
and if you're one of those medium to large organizations, you're going to decentralize your risk. So if you're a global working across those countries or with those geographical jurisdictional challenges, the last thing you want to do is centralize it in one area and try to have a mothership managing all of that, because the reasons you just outlined earlier.
Yep.
You'll decentralize the risk. And that's where these organizations operate on a group basis, regional territories.
Yep.
That's the only way they can comply with it. And then imagine that from a compliance perspective, centralized group looking at geographical. Then you've got all the different types of cultures to security, and the sub suppliers are in those regions. Yeah,
It's doable, but it's hard work.
Very, very quickly though, so our approach to this is we take this end-to-end life cycle approach, and we have based it on 6 core features. So we believe starting at I'll start at the first pillar and I'll end on the 6th pillar, and then we think about it as a repetitive cycle. We start with risk profiling. So not traditional risk management. We talk about risk profiling, and that's our first pillar.
Yep.
And that is profiling your suppliers based on criticality, so how critical they are to your operations, and exposure, how exposed they are. So you won't know how critical they are to your operations unless the individual directors of the individual executive teams are articulating the criticality of that supplier and agreeing on it. And then you won't know how exposed they are as a supplier unless you get into the nuts and bolts of their foundation security program as a supplier. So that ebb and flow. It's not based on how big they are. It's not based on how massive the logo is or how substantial the contract is. We look at supplier profiling based on their criticality of the organization and their risk exposure in terms of their security maturity. Once we do that, and by the way, we have 400 sub-control areas we go into. It's a deep piece of work. We then move on to the second pillar. So we then start looking at mapping and linking supplier dependencies. So our second pillar is called link. So what we do then is understand if there is going to be an exposed risk, if there is going to be a vulnerability, how does that cascade down the supply chain? And you won't know that if it's a technical vulnerability that's been exposed unless you've mapped the supply chain and the different types of technologies and different types of clouds they're using and the different dependencies they have. You can ask any organization, do you know how your suppliers are linked and mapped based on their technologies and based on their dependencies? Most will say no. So back to my point.
So where does that count? Like things like Apache struts when that came out. How do you then contact all of your organizations, your third-party organizations, to understand who's affected and what systems are going to be impacted? It's those kind of elements that give you value in understanding that. It sounds like a real ball's ache to do, but actually, if you build it into your requirements when you first gather and first procure systems and services, you could ask for a software bill of materials. You could do those types of things are possible, but you need to do it at the right time when people are looking to help.
But have you noticed at this point, we still haven't got around, we're not doing controls at this point. No. 2 pillars in, we're understanding critical risk profile of a supplier, we're understanding how the dependencies are all mapped, and then our third pillar looks at assessing. So then we start assessing the controls that are in place. Only this point, so we're now 3 steps in before we're even assessing the performance of controls. And that is the assessment of what stuff they have in place, technical and non-technical controls, which is the traditional approach, but we go and look for evidence-based examples. Once we do assessment of controls, then we look at a defensive pillar. So our 4th pillar looks at resilience. So defensive from a resilience perspective. So should the balloon go up across a couple of suppliers who have got linked dependencies, how much resilience is baked into the services that they provide you as the organization to keep you going? Because resilience is essentially, everything is built with resilience these days. You accept that you're going to be breached, you accept that you're going to be compromised, but the idea is the organization doesn't know it's happened because you built so much resilience in. The train keeps moving as the team and the resilience plans are kicking in and fixing the problem, right, with your suppliers.
And business continuity planning as part of that as well. So have you got a strategy for switching suppliers if something happens to one of them, you had to turn them off, for instance, or if they got acquired by somebody undesirable? That type of thing.
And that's the concentration of risk that we also we dive into that. So if you've got too much concentration of risk on one supplier, are they carrying too much? Therefore, back to risk profiling, they become a highly critical supplier who are highly exposed. So they may not be offering a key service, but there's too much risk in that supplier. And the substitutability of that supplier. How easy can we substitute them if they are a problem? We can't substitute somebody who's providing a unique element to a nuclear power plant,
AWS,
to your sort of process, right? There's maybe only a handful of suppliers, so we consider all of that. Once we've done the defend bit, which is pillar number 4,
Yep.
In that sort of cycle, we then look at 2 more pillars, and we measure, and then we assure. So once we've done the resilience piece of defend, we look at the measurement, and then we measure the performance of the controls in place, but not just the controls themselves, but the technologies that are being used, the environments the technologies are in, whether it's platform, software systems, physical systems, playing back those key performance indicators to the stakeholders who are paying for the investments. It goes back to your, I think, point you made about 25 minutes ago around ROI.
Yep.
Paying back, this is exactly the performance of the whole cycle working here. And I think each organization will have that differently. They want a different dashboard and monitoring. Yeah, monitoring the performance as well.
So that's before assure.
Yeah. And then assure is the final one.
Mm.
So once you've done all of that, that's then when you start looking at the assurance plan, i.e. validating what should be getting done is being done and reporting that back.
And the monitoring might be, some aspect of monitoring could be trigger points that rework some part of the cycle. So it might be a change in responsibility or activity service level. You might go from, I don't know, just collecting content and displaying content to being a transactional service for an organization where you retaining data that's sensitive, etc. That requires a new contract or a new set of cybersecurity risk evaluations and criticality evaluations. So those are the kind of drivers that the last pieces do. It keeps the whole thing moving, because you've got also the final piece, terminate, which is, how do I terminate contracts? Do I do it well? Do I ignore it because I'm excited to go into this new vendor, or I'm doing something else? Or do I go and repatriate the data, make sure it's deleted properly at the supplier that I'm getting that we're terminating, sorry. Those types of things are seldom done effectively. I think that a lot of people move on too quickly. They don't pay particular attention to those.
But that whole piece we just explained there, that's our approach to life cycle third-party cyber risk management.
Yep. Now,
you may be listening and thinking, okay, that's a lot to do for the cybersecurity team. But there's another common problem statement. It's all put on the shoulders of cybersecurity. That is not how we do this. We federate the responsibility. So if you look at the first 2 pillars, supplier risk profiling and supplier mapping dependencies, that unlikely is a security subject, right? That's probably a procurement subject, a commercial subject, maybe marketing, I'm not sure. But it will sit somewhere else because other people are better informed to do that piece of work. It might be in your risk management team, your third-party risk management team, if you're big enough to have that.
Yep.
So it's not a security sport. But when then you look at the 3rd and 4th pillar, the assessment and the resilience piece, that's likely a security sport. The assessment of security controls and the assessment of resilience, or the augmentation of resilience plans, and might work with safety teams and stuff like that.
Monitoring could go into the third line audit team or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's about spreading the responsibility and probably spreading the cost as well. So if budgets are split, that makes it more effective.
Yep.
So that's our approach. Our approach is that type of end-to-end cycle, federate the responsibility and bring the organization on, and bring, so you're making third-party supply chain security
part of the DNA.
Continuous. Yeah.
Andy, Adrian, thank you very much for coming on the Scooter Space podcast today. I've learnt a lot there, and I wish you guys all the best. If anybody has any questions about what Supplier should do, or about anything that was raised today, I'll be sure to put both Chaps and Matt's information down below. But once again, Chaps, thanks for coming on the Scooter Space podcast.
Thanks, Nick. Pleasure.
Cheers.